Pokemon's a really fun game series that I have a lot of love for, but despite all the years I've spent playing it, I've never once paid attention to the actual strategy of the game. I usually just gather a team of cute little guys, overlevel them until they become omnipotent, and then smoke the competition. This strategy hasn't failed me yet, but it also means my Pokemon knowledge is quite limited. We've already gone over which Pokemon I'd partner up with the Twist Boys, but we never discussed which teams I'd give them. So today we're going to dive into a world where the prefect isn't just a prefect, and the mages at NRC aren't just mages. They're all Pokemon trainers who have come to this glorious institution to hone their magic and their battle skills. Since you is from another world, one notably devoid of magic and probably also Pokemon, Professor Crowley has decided to gift them the rare starter Pokemon, Grimm. Will you and Grimm be able to conquer all 7 gyms, the Elite Four, and the champion of the school? Will such feats allow them to return home? I don't know, but I do know the Pokemon teams of all the students, so let's go over them together. But first, a few disclaimers. Now, the House Wardens are going to have full teams since they will be acting as the gym leaders in this scenario, but I don't think it makes sense for folks like Ace to have a full team too. Ace is just starting out in the magical Pokemon trainer world, so I think it's fitting for him and everyone else to receive the same number of Pokemon as their class year, +1. This will allow them to have at least one battle-ready buddy in addition to their partner, who may or may not have been brought up to fight. Secondly, each dorm has been assigned a typing, so everyone's Pokemon, besides their buddy, must be of that type. Thirdly, while we will be going off of vibes for each individual during this process, there will also be mentions of EN server story content, so this is your spoiler warning. Now then, let's start off with our very first gym, Heartslabyul Dorm, which I've decided to give a grass typing because of the roses, hedges, gardens, and general vibe of the dorm. I also feel like grass would be the easiest type to go up against given Grimm's fiery spells, so having the first book or gym be a bit easier is kind of in line with Pokemon logic, I think. But regardless, for young Prefect U to be able to challenge the gym leader, they're going to have to make their way through the hedge maze and collect a token from each card suit. Tokens they can only get from winning battles against the card soldiers. I think our first encounter in this gauntlet would have to be Ace, given that he, technically, is our first foe and friend in the prologue and book 1. Now, Ace is in a unique position because I gave him the partner Pokemon Cherubi, which is already a grass type, which means he's getting a fully mono team here. His second and battle-ready Pokemon would be Sprigatito, a little cat he found napping in the bushes of the school courtyard during his orientation gallivanting. I feel like this cat would have been disturbed by Apple and Ace, gotten a little fussy, threatened to rat them out to Riddle, but was eventually bribed by Ace to distract Riddle after a few promises of teaching it some magic tricks. With the crisis averted and a promise fulfilled, Sprigatito would be delighted to join Ace on his journey, and the two of them could practice magic together and slack off or catch a catnap here and there when the mood strikes them. Things of that nature. I think this Sprigatito would also take a liking to Cherubi and help it in battle practice so that the two of them could grow together. This may come with a little condescension, but I like to think Ace's Cherubi is a heads empty, no thoughts kind of Pokemon, so I can't imagine it would mind. Deuce, on the other hand, is also in the same monotyping predicament as Ace since his Quilladin is also currently a grass type. But I do think that Deuce, already having an evolved Pokemon as his partner, one that he evolved himself, would be a problem for acquiring his second partner, given that he's a freshman. I feel like a lot of the Pokemon I'm envisioning freshmen ending up with might have a hard time against, be intimidated by, or feel too prideful to pair up with Deuce since he's already likely ahead of the other kiddos joining the school in at least the Pokemon department. All of the starter Pokemon, except Perhaps a Grookey. I think that Grookey would have looked at Quilladin's shell as the perfect drum, and Quilladin, being a tough cookie himself, wouldn't mind getting bonked lightly to create a satisfying melody for the monkey. Deuce might have offered Quilladin's services in exchange for becoming partners, and I think Grookey would have been all too happy to accept. Sometimes this drumming habit does get in the way of battles as Grookey gets distracted and it causes problems for Deuce's whole team, but at the end of the day, I think this trio would get along well and do well enough together to work in whatever sort of funky way they do. Next up is Cater and his partner Yamper, an electric type Pokemon that's much too lazy to battle. Sure, it'll zip around and chase the hedgehogs, but it couldn't care less about battling other Pokemon. So, Cater's gotta rely on his three others, Gossifleur, Nuzleaf, and Simisage, to lead him to victory. I think during Cater's first year, he would have found a Pansage hiding in the hedge maze, while Cater was also hiding from the chaos of daily life. Transferring from being home with family to being on your own is hard at any age, and given Cater's complicated feelings about his family and his sisters, I think he might have just needed to find a pal to rely on, and the other humans might not have cut the check given that he still doesn't fully trust Trey when we meet Cater in Twist, and they've been buddies from the beginning. Pansage, though, might have shared a stress-relieving leaf, and the two could have bonded over a heart-to-heart, with Pansage becoming Cater's better battler. Over the course of that year, through the trials and tribulations, Pansage would evolve into Simisage, and to this day, I think they'd be really good pals. Nuzleaf now might have been a Seedot that one of the other students thought was weak and abandoned, one that Cater's Simisage might have taken pity on, and after some convincing, it became part of Cater's crew. Grateful to have a home again, I think the Seedot would be eager to train, and it would do its best not to disappoint. Over time, with Cater and Simisage's help, and the occasional stamina training when Yamper mistook it for a ball, the Seedot would have evolved into a deadly Nuzleaf. It may also be a little overprotective of this merry band now, using its leaf flute to scare those with lesser intentions away. Lilia, on the other hand, I think finds this music delightful and keeps trying to get Nuzleaf involved in pop music club activities. I feel like Cater might have picked up Gossifleur last, since it's a very magic-hammable Pokemon, but it doesn't really feel super strong to me, and that's totally okay because Cater already has some heavy hitters on his team. Gossifleur also likes to sing, and I think that would be a vibe that Cater would enjoy given his musical talents. Maybe they'd even create cute little songs together for social media. Wouldn't that be fun? However, I also feel like this Gossifleur could be a bit of a diva and not that into battling, or perhaps just a little less cooperative. Not entirely sure, but that's the feeling that I get. Trey now brought the family Alcremie to school with him, and I think given his current pursuits, it would make sense for him to target Pokemon that have some sort of connection to the culinary arts. So I think he would have a Pumpkaboo, Steenie, and Arboliva to help him in and out of the kitchen. Perhaps, surprisingly, I think the first Pokemon he'd encounter at the school would be a Smoliv, which isn't super helpful for sweets, but I do think he'd find this little guy hiding from Leona in the botanical garden, completely unaware that Leona wouldn't be caught dead eating a plant in public, and Trey could have offered the little fella an even better place to hide, Heartslabyul. Alcremie could have also helped ease the Smoliv's tension, being a food-adjacent Pokemon itself, and over time, Trey and Alcremie would boost the Pokemon's confidence enough for it to battle, training it up eventually into an Arboliva. I also think that Arboliva's calm nature also generally suits Trey too, so the two of them acting as Heartslabyul's big brothers, one to the humans and one to the Pokemon, would make sense. Bounsweet would have been Trey's second-year pickup, and it would have been really happy to play with Dolliv and Alcremie. I think at this point the food-adjacent Pokemon would have marked Trey as a safe person and wouldn't really be afraid to trade some of their special products with him for protection. Perhaps Bounsweet was in a similar situation, about to be guzzled by someone else's Toucanon, only to be saved by Trey. With a bit of training, they've not only evolved into a Steenie that's all too happy to help in the kitchen, carrying sacks of flour or sugar, and occasionally whipping up some icing too. Pumpkaboo is the most recent addition to the team, and I do not want to think about the implications of this Pokemon's lore too deeply for this alternate universe. I think it would have been attracted to NRC during Halloween, and it would have somehow made its way into Heartslabyul and then into the hedge maze. Trey, seeing the distant light, might have thought it was some dumb kid trying to stay up late for the holiday and had subsequently gotten lost in the hedge maze. Trey would go into the maze to fetch them, only to find that the light was coming from a pumpkaboo and not a student. He would then be forced into a game of tag, and the pumpkaboo would do its ghostly fading only to appear somewhere else in the maze, the two chasing after each other until Trey eventually caught it. Now it haunts the Heartslabyul bathroom to ensure that everyone is brushing their teeth properly, and if they don't, it either jump scares them or alerts Trey, whatever it's more in the mood for. Now then, our gym leader, our glorious teapot tyrant, Riddle Rosehearts, has a stacked team of Shaman, Florgus, Roserade, Scovillian, Whimsicott, and Lurantis. But I think he uses everyone but Shaman to fight. I feel like Shaman is exclusively a croquet partner and emotional support hedgehog, who I think Riddle would protect with his very life, so I don't think he would intentionally put them into harm's way. Instead, he's got 5 other battle-ready buddies, with his very first partner being a Scovillian. Riddle would have met this little fellow when they were still a Capsicid, and I think this Pokemon would have partnered up with Riddle solely because of his red, angry face. I can see this spicy little Pokemon trying to tackle Riddle only to see Riddle getting angry at someone else, turning red, and going off. Instead of being afraid, I think this Pokemon would have viewed Riddle as a really weird Scovillian for half of a second, and then assumed he could help them become a Scovillian, which he eventually did. Next up is Roserade, which should be a given, honestly. Riddle is the Rose, and the Rose is Riddle, and I think it would be a crime not to give him one of these Pokemon. Roserade, I think, likes to act as Riddle's knight, protecting his queen from harm and danger, and I think this desire might have started once Riddle became Housewarden. After all, a freshman becoming a Housewarden is a very rare occurrence, and even if he had the skills to do that, Riddle would still be inexperienced and cementing his reign would have been difficult. Enter Roserade, the brave and thematically appropriate knight, who would fill in the gaps of power to support Riddle, or at least that was their thought. Also, when Riddle became Housewarden, he apparently made Heartslabyul into an even more orderly and even more rule-abiding than it was. Because of this, I think he also would have attracted a Florges or many Flabébés, who would eventually become a couple of Florges. One of you lovely viewers pointed out that Florges protects their gardens with utmost dedication, and I agree that this works very well with Riddle's overall character. He takes care of the gardens well for sure, but he also takes care of his dorm well, and he takes care of all creatures within it, human or not, in the same way. I think this quality would have attracted these types of Pokemon to the dorm, and I think Riddle would have taken one on as a Pokemon partner to not only help him in battle, but to help him manage his wayward students who may or may not be trying to harm those rose bushes when they get mad at Riddle. Perhaps when tending to the roses one day, Riddle would have stumbled upon a Fomantis sleepily hiding from some bug Pokemon or from some rowdy dorm members. Unawares that disturbing this little guy's naps ensure a beam of sunlight to the face, Riddle attempted to move them so he could better care for the roses. One beam of light later, Roserade and the Fomantis would have been locked in a brawl, attracting the attention of other Pokemon and students. Riddle, for his part, would shoo his dorm members away, and the Fomantis would have seen his power in this and appreciated it, thusly deciding that they needed to be pals for the Fomantis' survival. After sitting through a lecture on where it was appropriate to sleep and how to follow the rules regarding sleep, the Fomantis would have been added to Riddle's roster and would eventually evolve into a Lunarantis. The last member of the team is a Pokemon I threw in for funsies because I think eventually when it evolves it'll make a bit more sense, but I also think it would be the newest member of the team, so having it still be a Whimsicott makes sense in my mind. I also think this is the most chaotic Pokemon out of the bunch, and as such, Riddle has made it his goal to properly train this little fella to be a law-abiding citizen. His attempts are currently failing, but I think this Pokemon would play a part in Riddle's transformation post-Book 1, and I think after that incident, the two would have a better understanding of one another. I also just wanted to give Riddle a fluffy little friend to help with his stress, and that's kind of that. Those are all of Riddle's Pokemon, which would be really intimidating if not for Grimm's overwhelmingly fire-based abilities, but I think it's still a fun team, and I think it works very well for this being the first gym of sorts for the MC to battle. Savanaclaw is up next, and I think it would be really fun for them to be a fighting type gym. All of these dudes are hyped up for sports and physical combat. In fact, they train every morning to be the best of the best at spell drive. So while their dorm kinda looks like it would be a ground type space, and Leona's special magic involves dusting things, turning them into the ground, I think fighting is a bit more in spirit for the Savanaclaw overall. Unlike Heartslabyul, Grim likely won't be able to defeat everyone here, so Yu's going to have to recruit a few more Pokémon. Which ones they'll add, I'll leave up to your imagination though. For now, let's get into who our opponents are and what Pokémon they have. Jack has his beloved cactus Cacnea, but I also think he'd likely find or be sought out by a Riolu, and the two would get along very, very well. Jack has really good vibes, and while he doesn't like to share his care, he does, in fact, care. He's also really dedicated to his training and honing his craft, so I can see a Riolu admiring this quality while also appreciating Jack's nature. Plus, the two are kind of both dogs, in a way, so there is something to be said for that. I imagine that Jack and his eventual Lucario will become a force to be reckoned with since the two will be training until the sun goes down. They are going to be doing their darndest in every challenge and learning from every battle, so there's no chance they don't become a great duo. As it stands though, they still have a bit to learn, so for now the Pokemon is still a Riolu, and Jack is still a freshman, and they're still learning how to work together. Ruggie, of course, has Nickit, but he also has Scraggy and Palmo too. Scraggy, I think, just has a vibe that suits Ruggie, and I can also see him making use of the elastic skin this Pokemon sheds, either selling it off or using it as a reliable material for shopping bags or something similar. At least that would be my assumption since this Pokemon uses the skin to protect itself, and it has the ability to shed said skin, so I can only assume that it occasionally does indeed shed this resource and that it would be a really good material to have on hand for a variety of needs. Since Ruggie, of course, looks for any and every opportunity to make a bit of coin, I think he might seek out this Pokemon on purpose as a cash cow of sorts. A reliable source of income that he can use that doubles as a battle-ready partner. Palmo also has a similar thing going on since it's got an electric typing as well. I think Ruggie would have seen a Palmy or Palmo and figured it'd be a cheap way to keep the lights on, so he picked one up for those benefits. However, these Pokemon are usually found in groups, and I think hyenas also form packs, so there is a similarity there. Given that Ruggie is from an area that has a strong sense of community, as seen by him bringing home and sharing all the nearly out-of-date food during winter break, I think it's likely that Palmo felt a sort of camaraderie with him and Nickit and Scraggy, opting to join their little band for the low price of charging Ruggie's phone every now and again. But now we come to our big bad Savanaclaw gym leader, Leona King Scholar, and I kinda wanted to give him moodier Pokemon since he's such a moody boy. And eventually I landed on giving him an Annihilate, Komodo, Toxicroak, Blaze Breed Tauros, and Breloom, in addition to his existing Marowak. Unlike Riddle, all of Leona's Pokemon are battle-hardened warriors, and they've kept their prestige at NRC for many more years than they should have. Marowak has been by Leona's side since long before school, but what about the rest? I don't think we know for sure exactly when Leona rose to power, at least I don't remember if this was mentioned at any point in the story, but I do think it is safe to assume that he took up the position of House Warden rather quickly, as I can't imagine anyone standing in his way or Leona accepting someone else's orders. I also like to imagine that Leona had a bit more spunk before the spell drive losses to Malleus, so his first pickup was likely a combat breed Tauros, closely followed by a Jangmo. Given that Leona is very smart and plays a lot of chess, I can see him crafting a team that is very strategic, one that has few weaknesses. But since I don't know very much about competitive Pokemon, this developed into Leona amassing a variety of subtypings to cover his bases. A combat Tauros could evolve into a fire or water subtype, so Leona would have some flexibility there. As he picked up more Pokemon, he could make a better decision about which typing to go with, and I think given Savanaclaw's very physical nature, the Blaze breed was a no-brainer. Jangmo was likely picked up because it is a dragon type, and Leona might have studied this Pokemon as he fought with it to try to pick out some draconic weaknesses and strengths. This information could maybe be applied to Malleus for Spell Drive, perhaps, since they're both dragons. And I think in this dedicated pursuit, the little guy would have evolved into a Kamo'o in no time at all. Next up would have been a Croagunk that Leona might have gotten to lazily end battles without too much effort. The poison could sap away foes' strength, leaving them wide open to attacks from his other Pokemon. Plus, I feel like Croagunk and its evolved form are very efficient fighters. From what I remember of the anime, it seemed like Croagunk would paralyze folks in just one hit with its poison, and I think Leona could maybe use this ability to stop the roughhousing of his dormmates very easily, since I can imagine most of his underlings being a bit too hot-headed to understand that the poison jab is very different from a regular punch. Breloom is here to give Leona another element for his well-rounded team and to perhaps keep an eye on his other Pokemon. It's noted that these guys can go toe-to-toe with pro boxers, so I think this Breloom in particular acts as a sort of coach for the rest of the team. They should, in theory, be able to partially exhaust the Tauros, soothe the Annihilate, and otherwise entertain the troop when Leona is off taking one of his famous naps. Speaking of Annihilate, they're here mainly for the connection they have aesthetically to Leona's moody broody actions. Given that it can shatter its opponents and Leona can effectively shatter anything into 1,000 specks of sand with his special magic, I figured these two would have a lot to chat about. I can also see Leona being someone who can understand Annihilate's position or empathize with any misunderstandings surrounding it, such as it being regarded as too destructive when it might just be overstimulated or something along those lines. It also has a bit of wildness to it that I think not only fits Leona but Savanaclaw as a whole, so I really wanted to give him one of these Pokemon even if it didn't make too much sense in the team comp. It does, however, give him yet another subtyping, so there's at least that. I feel like this team would be a nightmare to go up against so early on in one of these games, given the variety of subtypes it has and the limited variety of Pokemon at the MC's disposal. But it's probably still doable if one focuses on the fighting parts, I think. Anyways, next up is Octavinelle, our water gym, a gym that Grimm cannot do anything against, and I think that's very fitting given how Book 3 goes. There also isn't any other typing I could give this storm because it is literally in the ocean. It is water, and all of the foes we'll be facing here are mermen who require the existence of water to, exist. I think the gimmick of this gym could be very similar to what we see happen in Book 3, where you have to go through rounds of orders or something similar, and I think in one of the games there was a restaurant that was kind of like this. I think the battle restaurant functions in a very similar way. I feel like that suits the vibe of the Monstro Lounge. And first up in that gauntlet of our water-dependent fellows is Floyd, who has the terrifying team of Bruxish, Sharpedo, and Barraskewda, with which to create the chaos he so desires. We've talked about Bruxish before, and I think all of those points are still the same, and I think there is still some overlap between that and my thinking for his other two fish. Sharpedo would be Floyd's first pickup at school because of course it would be. I think when Floyd stepped into Octavinelle and saw that there was a gang of Sharpedos trying to intimidate his fellow freshmen, he would have been delighted to take them on. Eventually, one of the Sharpedos would have either been tough enough or impressed enough by Floyd's sheer willpower and strength that they would have been more than happy to join him on his chaotic quest. Floyd is also very heavily associated with sharks since he hangs out around sunken ships, has a shark in the background of his tropical wear card, talks about Gontu being a shark-like dude, and so on and so forth. I thought it would be too on the nose for the partner video, but I think he definitely deserves one on his team, so a Sharpedo he will get. I think Floyd would have gotten his Barraskewda in a very similar way. Perhaps it wanted to challenge him for its own prestige, or maybe he just set it off one day with his own actions. Who is to say? But I think Floyd would have found fighting with this Pokemon fun and then would have added it to his team. Plus, given how ruthless these two Pokemon are, they give off the same sort of vibe as Floyd's eel form Groovy art, and I think if you saw this eel like this also being backed up by these three Pokemon, it would be absolutely terrifying. And most importantly, they are all outwardly threatening, which is way more in line with Floyd's vibe than Jade, so I think it fits in that way too. Speaking of Jade, he's going to have a team that is much more geared towards subterfuge, with Malamar, Tentacruel, and Drizzle quickly and quietly dispatching their enemies, while Morlul offers moral support from the sidelines. Malamar is Jade's terrifying partner who mentally destroys their enemies just as much as it physically does. And we already know all about that, don't we? Tentacruel won't go down the psychological route so much, but it will catch you in its net of tentacles, not letting go until your body is limp. I think Jade might have mistakenly thought that to get a Toedscruel you had to evolve a tentacle on land, which unfortunately is not how it works, so he ended up with a Tentacruel anyway. I also feel like this would be a complete lie that he tells people who question his decision for picking this specific Pokemon, because there are arguably more dangerous and perhaps useful water-type Pokemons like, say, Toxapex. But I think Jade may have actually picked this Pokemon because it was easy to catch, and it is a bit misleading in the optics department. He already has a strong partner in Malamar, and I don't think he would want to create any personality issues with his new hires. Therefore, having this Tentacruel be more muscle than brain allows him to have both on his team with minimal interpersonal conflict. Drizzle comes in as a bit of both, the little brother that Tentacruel and Malamar are raising to be a mega useful spy for Jade. Now, this is a Pokemon that I think Jade would have stumbled upon on campus hiding in a pond or fountain, as Sobble has the ability to turn invisible, and I think this ability would have appealed to him. After some careful observation, Jade would have stepped in to protect the Sobble from an enemy, comforted the crying Pokemon, and then persuaded it to join his team. Little did Jade know that this Sobble was also a keen manipulator, using their tears to get snacks from the other students, turning invisible to pull pranks, and otherwise causing minor mischief. This ended up being a boon for both, and now that the Sobble is a Drizzle, the prankster nature is being utilized in much more fruitful ways. And yes, this Pokemon also quickly learned that no one messes with Morlul, not even a little prank. And now Drizzle also protects the mushroom, in part to save others from the terrors of Malamar and Tentacruel. So, aside from Dragalge, Azul would also have a Walrein, Almastar, Wishiwashi, Toxapex, and Empoleon in his role as gym leader at NRC. They all would have been picked intentionally for various different reasons, with the first being his Walrein. These Pokemon are used to the cold seas, so Azul would be able to take them back home with him quite easily. And since it's an ice type, it also has the benefit of being an ice machine for the lounge. Walreins are known for crushing ice with their tusks, so this big boy is definitely an employee who gets paid in fish rather than cash. But it cuts down on the bottom line, so it's good to go as far as Azul is concerned. Almastar is the obvious parallel here. While not an octopus, Nautili are still cephalopods, so they are still somewhat related. I really don't know if Azul would want an octopus Pokemon. They would have a lot in common, but they might hit a little too close to home. I'm not entirely sure. I think he may also view them as a liability, since he'd almost certainly form a certain type of kinship with them, which could become a weakness his foes would exploit. So a Pokemon that's close enough still provides the aesthetic benefit without the potential problems, and that seems a lot more reasonable for him. And I think Omastar specifically is hardier, which is also something Azul would appreciate in battle. Wishiwashi on their own are little crybaby fish, and Azul was also, for a time, a bit of a crybaby, although I don't think that is the reason that he paired up with this particular fish. Instead, I think he chose it precisely because of its weaker image. It's the perfect ploy to set others at ease as he discusses business dealings, the perfect partner for making connections, an unassuming little guy that couldn't possibly do any harm, right? But then it swarms, the hive coming alive, and the demon of the sea emerges from the chaos. And is that not how Azul comes across once the business has concluded? Once the contracts have been signed, sealed, and the consequences of those deals comes to light? That's the stronger parallel I see between these two, and it's not like Azul doesn't have any other heavy hitters to back him up either. He can afford to have a weak Pokemon because his others are just so good. Or at least, I think that's the way he would spin this. But I do also think he's very protective of this little fish, since Jade and Floyd would no doubt constantly threaten to eat it. Another Pokemon that Floyd at least poses a threat to is Toxapex, since this Pokemon often skirmishes with Bruxish. However, with its poison typing, I think Azul would be able to find ample uses for Toxapex to justify these annoyances. The image of Toxapex also being encased in its spiky legs is a very Azul thing to me, since he's rather closed off and puts a lot of defenses up, like the spikes, to stop anyone from exploiting his weaknesses or revealing his past. And as an added bonus, 3 days seems to be a very significant period of time in most of Toxapex's dex entries, and 3 days is also an extremely important time frame for not only Ariel, but you and Co during Book 3. Last but not least in the lineup is Empoleon, who is a very Mafia-esque Pokemon in my mind because they have the same vibe as the polar bears in Zootopia. Despite the fact that these are two very different species, I don't know why my brain is like this, it just is. So aesthetically, I think this penguin fits in with the rest of the crew and is a really strong cold weather bird. It also is a very prideful Pokemon, and while you can say that anyone at NRC is prideful, I think the House Wardens and Jamil are the most so given their overblotting. Therefore, I think the penguin works for Azul in that way too, rounding out his team pretty well in my mind. There is certainly an aesthetic here that I think works very well for Azul, and it would be interesting to see how the MC would handle this gym. Scarabia would be next, but unfortunately we are out of time for today, and I'm going to have to leave our considerations here. But I hope you all enjoyed this dive into a twisted Pokemon universe. And like always, I want to know your thoughts down below. Do you agree with my picks? Do you think other Pokemon would be better suited? Do these teams actually work? Or have I just created everything based off of aesthetics? Let me know down below, and while you're there, let me know if you like this content and want more like it. You can also leave a like and subscribe, and before you go, I just have to remind you that you're amazing and I hope you have a wonderful day.